smonta tutto, il film non si fa più. Quei giorni qua non ci deve essere più niente, bisogna cominciare subito. Coraggio, al lavoro, buttate giù. Dico bene, autore?
Sì, grazie. Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Ciao, marinai.
Welcome to Cinema Italia, a podcast dedicated to the world of Italian cinema. Presented by me, John Bleasdale. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Italia. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to have Dario Linares of the Cinematologists podcast.
Sorry, it's Linares.
Oh,
Sorry.
good God. Dario Linares, I'm not going to re-record it. I'm just going to have you correct
You're just going
me.
on. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
I'm going to have you correct me on air, so to speak.
Many apologies.
Sorry, no, apologies, mine, totally mine. Don't you worry, Dario. There's going to come a point where you will mispronounce an Italian word during
That's
this
absolutely
podcast, and I will wreak my revenge. And
No
today we are looking. How are you doing, Dario, by the way?
Yeah, I'm well. Looking forward to this, actually. I've just been sort of watching, well, I've watched the film, obviously, and then done a couple of documentaries as well. And to be honest with you, I was hoping to watch a few more films to catch up on, but you know what life's like.
Yeah.
It's in the way of research viewing.
Yeah, exactly. Life is what happens while you're trying to watch films. That's like as John Lennon said. L'Avventura, The Adventure by Antonioni, Michelangelo Antonioni. There you go. After all my bragging about pronunciation, and I forget the name. And this is one of Antonioni's sort of breakout films, really. He's made several movies before this, but this is one of the films which really puts him on the map. How did you first sort of arrive? When was your first sort of viewing experience of this movie?
Well, this was probably, along with Piero Le Fou, Godard's film, the two films that I saw at university when I was doing film studies that introduced me to the kind of films that I generally became interested in, as in they were the zenith in my mind of the European art house tradition. And I think it came in tandem with my return to university, because I returned as a mature student and I wanted to do film. But very quickly, I got into reading quite dense, highbrow criticism. And also, I began to really get into films that I felt were much more open, I think is a basic word I'll start with, in terms of what they were trying to do in terms of the non-explanation to an audience about what the meaning was or what the film was about. I suddenly realized it was a whole sort of, history of movie making which didn't adhere to a formulaic system, whether it's kind of linear storytelling or mythical hero's journey or any of the stuff that a lot of cinema and mainstream art is kind of predicated on. And I just became really sort of obsessed and interested in how to understand these films without being obsessively concerned with what they were trying to say in a kind of realist outcome sense, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's a strange. I mean, this is a film I've only watched, I think, a couple of times, most recently for this podcast, obviously. And but my memory of the film is very different from my experience of rewatching it. So my memory of the film is very much something happens on an island, and then the film sort of tails off and nothing happens much. And yet rewatching it, it's like this film is kind of packed with story. It's kind of doing a lot of story. It's just that the stories, as you say, don't satisfy those templates that we're so used to seeing reproduced.
Well, I think there is a little bit of a myth about the fact that this event, let's say, occurs at the beginning, and basically everything else kind of peters off after that, and it's just people wandering around. Now, I agree. There's a lot going on here. I would say there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know whether it's story or not. Sorry, let me just turn that off. But there is certainly a lot of interaction, and there's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of places that the couple kind of go to, and a lot of individual kind of vignettes and moments that are. I mean, I suppose Antonioni is not really considered a symbolic filmmaker, but I think that he actually is more than people give him credit for. But definitely there's a lot of scenarios and environments in which his concern with, say, alienation and existentialism and characters who on the surface, are part of a bourgeois class who seem to have everything going, for them, when it comes to sort of money and entitlement and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, seem empty and vacuous. So I suppose sort of trying to understand what Antonioni is trying to do with his filmmaking is one of the things that many critics, and other filmmakers are sort of obsessed with. Those who love his films, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very divisive figure. I mean, Orson Welles famously sort of made a film because he hated Antonioni so much,
right?
Kind of parodying him, or at least parodying that sort of post blow up Antonioni, that sort of European, goes to America and makes films, and goes to London and makes films about sort of English language culture. So to put it in a little bit in context and to solidify what we're talking about, if that isn't something which is somewhat contradictory of what maybe Antonioni's trying to do. We start the film with a young woman, Anna, and her friend played Anna. I can't remember who's plays her, which is kind of part of the point. Monica Vitti plays her friend, much more famous Italian actress and an actress who turns up in other Antonioni films. They're in Rome in a sort of and leaving father alone while they go on a sort of pleasure cruise. And even there in that scene, there's kind of a secret that isn't explicated. There's sort of like something. There's a little. He says something, and I'm not sure if it leads to the next thing that's being said, or if there's just a secret that's not spoken. The friends who are gathered, she's having an affair with one of these men who's much older than her, played by the actor who was James Bond's father-in-law on Her Majesty's Secret Service, who's kind of a good 10, 15, 20 years maybe older than Anna. They go on a pleasure cruise to the islands around Sicily, and reminded me a little bit of The Lady of Shanghai as well. This sort of like all these people on a boat, not particularly liking each other, not particularly. There's a sort of frisson of things going on, and during a sort of pleasure trip to this island, very remote, a little bit Stromboli-esque, sort of very foreboding, inhospitable island, Anna goes missing, and that's the end of the story.
kind of, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where right from the start, and if you've watched any of Antonioni, especially post this film, there is that sort of fundamental difference, I think, to mainstream films where the intention that's set up, whether it's a narrative or dialogue intention, never seems to match up to an outcome that you might expect. Now, again, like one of the ways he does this in visual terms is as he's classically uses a close-up, but then he doesn't. The outcome of the close-up is never kind of has its outcome in a classical sense. So, what I'm trying to get at is the fact that the camera will focus on a character's face, and the character's face will be looking somewhere, and we never see, or we very rarely see where that character is looking. And often what he will do was he'll have something in the background, or the camera will shift so something else will come in to occupy the space alongside the close-up, right? So the intention of what he's actually framing and what the gaze of the person is in close up is never sort of revealed in a specific sense. So what you get then is this really almost kind of like alienated feeling of what am I supposed to be, you know, garnering from what these characters are actually doing and looking at. And that all just comes through, you know, what he's obviously getting his characters to do and where he's positioning his camera.
He does like the tops of heads as well. He likes sort of, you know, tops of heads start in the frame of foreheads, and then, especially Monica Vitti, then she will sort of move into a full. It will be her movement which will present a more classical close up of her face. So I'm being a little bit facetious saying the story ends there, which contradicts what I said a little bit earlier, which is that it doesn't really end there. What happens is it sort of becomes something like a classical thriller. There's somebody missing. There's a mystery. How did she go? Has she been kidnapped by smugglers? Has she committed suicide? Has she been murdered by somebody else on the boat? What is she just shivering in some, you know, fallen down? Has there been an accident or something? And so you get all these possibilities, and you get the police arriving, you get her father arriving. He's a diplomat and had so a quite high-ranking figure. And then the characters just kind of, well, what do we do? Carry on our cruise? Do we go over here? Should we go to these islands? And Monica Vitti and the lover Sandro, they go off and sort of do the search. And as they do the search, they kind of precipitously fall in love with each other in such a way as to once more, a little bit like what you were saying with the gays, kind of confounds you. I mean, what are they seeing that we're not seeing? What are they feeling that we as spectators don't really have an intimate access to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, it relates to Antonioni's wider themes because at the beginning, as you said, the relationship between Anna and Sandro, um, again, is not kind of realized in a way that a typical romantic relationship is set up. You know, she sort of talks about she hasn't seen him for a while, and it's like I've already kind of like gotten used to not being with you. And then they have this kind of, I mean, it's not a sex scene at all, but you know what's gone on. But she's completely kind of like nonplussed by this. I mean, there's this famous sort of repetition of perché, 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 and it's like, why are we here? Why are we making love? What's the point, right? And you know, there is this sort of underlying, I don't know if tension is the right word, but this sort of force that you feel through the character of Anna, where she is dissatisfied, she is alienated. You know, we're on the island, the absolutely beautifully shot sort of sea has this, you know, beautiful kind of grotesqueness, or it's sublime. You know, where we're so impressed by what we see, but yet we can see how dangerous it is. And she's told not to jump in the water, but she does jump in the water. And there's this really weird thing where she kind of pretends that there's a shark coming, and like, well, there's no shark. You know, everybody's kind of like saying, what are you doing here? So there's this really sort of underlying game playing going on where she's almost trying to sort of make up things to think about and you know, things to be concerned with, where you know, because she doesn't seem to be interested in her surroundings. And then there is no pre-warning to this disappearance. So she just kind of like disappears, and Monica Vitti's character and Claudia and Sandro are kind of, you know, you get a good sort of 20 minutes of people wandering around these islands, the Aeolian Islands, which is an old volcano, sort of, you know, where is she? What is going on? And very quickly then, you know, their relationship starts to focus on each other, and rather than the story of where Anna has gone, that's just now the scaffolding that keeps them together as they move through these different parts of Italy, quote unquote, looking for her. And I think that it's almost kind of like, I mean, again, I don't know how much spoiling you want to do, John, but as we go through, you realize that Sandro now has just become interested in Claudia and is sort of not really interested in where Anna is anymore. And the relationship then, I think for me, the premise of the movie then depends on the morality of Monica Vitti realizing that on the one hand, she's kind of maybe falling in love or is concerned with this guy or wants to be with this guy, but yet she realizes that, a day or so ago, her best friend who was with this guy has completely disappeared. So there's a whole sense of what are these people interested in and where is the morality of their behaviors around what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think let's get the names straight. So Monica Vitti is playing Claudia. Leia Massari is playing Anna. That's the actress who sort of is the protagonist who, like in Psycho, which made the same year, disappears at an early point in the film. Gabriele Ferzetti is the actor who plays Sandro. Just so that we're all on the same page. Yeah, I mean, one of the other things I would say about the island that they walk around is the sound of the sea is so insistent and it's so kind of unnerving. You have these beautiful images of the sea, but that sound, it's kind of there's a hypnotic element to it, but there's also sort of an incessantness that it is disturbing. And on the island isn't empty. First of all, it's this empty landscape, and then this old man turns up who weirdly has come back from Australia, which almost gives it a sort of mythic thing, and starts talking to them partly in English, which, it's like, where the hell did this just pop up from? This guy who's supposed to be like of the earth, the most sort of, the typical stereotypical person who lives in a hut is actually from much further away than any of these cosmopolitan people.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of the elements I think of Antonioni where there is perhaps a level of symbolism that's going on here, but again, he doesn't make it kind of obvious in the sense of, oh, this character represents this kind of symbolic element like fear or knowledge or whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? Because you don't really know why he's there, and I think even with. It's interesting that you talk about the sound because one of the other films that I talked about, one of the other films I watched before talking to you was Il Deserto Rosso. And that has a very interesting soundtrack, but which is much more kind of industrial because Monica Vitti is wandering around an industrial wasteland rather than a, volcanic island. So I think he's very interested in creating a sort of sense of atmosphere that coincides with the mood of what is going on here. I mean, and he's not the only filmmaker to do that. But it's interesting how the wind it seems to kind of like pick up and is whistling more and more and you can see Vitti's hair sort of blowing about as they're kind of discussing, where is the disappearance? But that suddenly morphs into, so why don't you come with me and go and search for her off the island? It's almost as if there is, maybe it's too cliche to say, the storms of the breakup of this relationship are going on here. I think that's a little bit too pat, but I think that Antonioni is a filmmaker that's much more about what is going on screen or in your ears as an atmospheric effect rather than it means something very specific that I'm going to explain to you.
Oh yeah, I think he's definitely not an allegorical filmmaker in that, and I think there's complexities to each of the characters which make them go way beyond any sort of symbolic sort of penciled in shape. For instance, Anna's reading Tender is the Night and the Bible, and those two books seem to, her father even holds up the Bible and says, "Oh, this is she can't have committed suicide. Nobody reading the Bible can commit suicide." And but he ignores F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is a book about a lost generation plagued by suicide and plagued by people who are doing, I mean, which one was she reading? It seems to be both of these are on offer, if you like. I think one of the things that I found incredibly rich rewatching this is how much doubling the film has. And the film, you mentioned Red Desert, and I don't want to leap ahead too much perhaps, but it really reminded me of Professione Reporter or The Passenger, I think is the English language title, which is another Antonioni film about somebody going missing and somebody else assuming their identity. Here, Anna goes missing, and really the second half of the film is about Claudia taking on Anna's role, if not identity. Anna is dark-haired, Monica Vitti is blonde. So you have that negative positive going on, and you have also Gabriel Ferzetti's Sandro is old, and the other major relationship Anna has is with her father. Her father is a diplomat, and at one point, Sandro says, "I wish I should have been a diplomat. I would, that's one other career path that I didn't do." And that complexity really struck me at how busy this film is in terms of, Antonioni, if you want to have the sort of stereotyped, you saw him at university, you were saying earlier, stereotyped version would be, the tap dripping and, the landscape and nothing happening for 10 minutes. And that so isn't what is going on here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that there is a scene sort of towards the end where Sandro just does talk about his almost kind of like his selling out, that he feels like he had, he says something along the lines of, I used to have ideas. And there's a really great, and he used to have ideas, and now he's just accepting the fact that he's going to put a red carpet into something that doesn't fit just because his client wants him to, something along those lines anyway. But then there's a really great scene where he's just wandering around again, and he's again, it's towards the end, so him and Viti are together, but he's left her in the hotel, and he's sort of wandering around the fantastic architecture that's around. And there's a small sort of drawing or painting on the floor that somebody is doing, some street marketeer is doing, and the ink is still next to the painting, and he looks at it, and he obviously thinks it's quite good because he just ends up spilling this painting on purpose over the drawing, and the guy comes up and says, "What did you do that for?" And he says, no, I didn't do anything." And they get into this back and forth, but it's clear there's this sort of, he's trying to destroy something that he no longer is, or maybe he aspires to be when he was younger. So I think maybe with the male older characters, there is again, related to sort of Antonioni's themes of being alienated or dissatisfied with the environment or the construction of life that is created for you, and that or that you've ended up in, and always searching for ways, even if they're short term and superficial, that you want something that almost distracts you from these darker inner feelings and thoughts.
Also, that young man is around about Monica Vita's age as well, So there's a sort of, and he sort of does this. Oh God, this is so Italian. This thing of slapping his face and saying, "There you go, little boy. I've been in more fights than you've had hot dinners." There is a generational thing going on here, that we have something where we do have young Italy, young Italia, I was going to say. This is a film that appeared in Cannes Film Festival at the same time as La Dolce Vita. La Dolce Vita won the Palme d'Or, perhaps unsurprisingly, whereas this film was heartily booed. But it is interesting, I think, that you could watch these films side by side and you would go, okay, these come from the same place, the same culture. They're very different perspectives. They're very different things that they're doing, but you can feel the same concerns running through them.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, Antonioni obviously was famously of the generation, or perhaps slightly younger of the generation of the neorealists. But his concern was with these bourgeois characters, and I think it's all of them in the film. All of the bourgeois characters are trying to tap into the kind of urgency and life force of youth. They're all very concerned about their sort of immediate pleasures. Let's say there's a great scene where one of Viti's friends is kind of having this affair with, or you don't know it's affair, you don't get that much information, but he's basically hanging around with a young Italian painter, and she takes Viti up to the studio, and there's a great scene where the Italian, he's got loads of nudes, and that's essentially what he draws and paints. He ends up sort of in an embrace with this woman, with Viti watching on, and she kind of, at the beginning of of this moment, she kind of laughs as if she's sort of enjoying the frivolousness of this. And then suddenly her face turns and she says to him, "What are you doing?"
Mm.
And the woman kicks her out. And again, it relates back to that sort of sense of the conscious, that VT is the consciousness of the film, I think, and this sort of discrepancy between the frivolousness and superficiality of what's going on, and where is there something kind of meaningful and more behind all of this superficiality that's going on. And I think, Antonioni is interesting, in the sense that some of the interviews that I've seen of him, and he's been questioned about why he didn't, well, he didn't become a neorealist, or I don't think he turned his back on it, but why he was making films about the bourgeois characters. And one of his interesting answers that I read was that, look, the working class and the upper classes have the same concerns. They fall in love, they fall out of love. They have psychological lives and all of this kind of stuff. But for the working class, they have to deal with money first. You know what I mean? They have to. That's their primary concern. With the bourgeoisie, they don't have those concerns. So suddenly you can focus completely on the inner lives of these characters, because they're not worried about where their next money is, where next paycheck is coming from. They're not worried about those kind of economic considerations. So it gives you the opportunity to be much more complex in terms of, what is actually going on psychologically with these characters, and how that can map onto the aesthetics of the film, in a sort of more pure sense.
I mean, it gives them a narrative freedom. Sandro can jump on a train and not worry that he's going to get kicked off, and they can run into a shop and ask for some blue paint to get away from the men. Who, the one sort of character who isn't really bourgeois, or at least is newly arrived bourgeois, is Monica Vitti's Claudia, because she says at one point, "We didn't have any money in our family, so we had to, this is all new to me," and there is a sense that would very much match with your idea of her being the conscience of the film, because she's looking around at these old, not nouveau riche, but old riche, and thinking, this is kind of incestuous. I mean, the painter surrounded by nudes, it looks like he's like 14, 15. And I think
that's right.
He's referred to constantly as the nephew. So the incestuousness of that relationship is really apparent. It's essentially a MILF scene.
Yeah, well, use that phrase rather than me, but yeah, no, absolutely right, and I think that the sort of the more opaque the story becomes in terms of how it relates back to Anna's disappearance, it becomes more about Claudia revealing to herself that this environment that she's in and these people that she is with is not satisfying, any kind of core value or core interest or anything, beyond just the superficiality of any given experience that is happening at the time. You know what I mean? The immediate pleasure of that is what I mean. Like when she gets kicked out of that room, the woman says, who's having the affair with the 14-year-old painter, she says, all I'm concerned about is my heart is racing, and you can tell my husband that's all I care about right now. So it's almost as if that immediate pleasure is the thing that is the focus of this character, and it kind of stands in for all of these bourgeois characters. They're going on the cruise, they're interested in their food and in their clothing and this kind of stuff. And VT is sort of wandering around this, at times getting sucked into it, but then always kind of realizing that there's something fundamentally rotten about it.
Yeah. And that goes with, I mean, I think there's a huge morass of, it's so interesting to unpick this, because you referred earlier to when Anna and Sandro sort of have a quickie, and they're sort of, perché. But through the window, you can see Monica Vitti's Claudia watching from the square, and she actually sort of wanders beneath the window of the apartment, and I'm assuming can sort of hear or is eavesdropping. if this was like a lesser movie, you might have like a 5 minute scene at the end where she says, "It was I, you hear me? I who killed Anna," and I forgot it. And now I've remembered, because, that would, from a narrative point of view, be perfectly be predictable and satisfying in what. As we get into the latter half, and as she begins to take on the role and really ask herself, how quickly can I forget this person in order to, have sex with Sandro? And they do. I keep coming back to, there are like three Hitchcock moments. I've already mentioned the Psycho parallel. There's the train, which is like the North by Northwest. All of these, by the way, are achronological. They're not. Hitchcock is doing them afterwards, so I'm not sure if that how this works. There's the train going by while they're having sex, or embracing, but again, it's an obvious stand-in for sex. And then when she's had sex, they go into this small Sicilian town, and you've got to remember, a young Italian woman walking around a Sicilian town in those days would be an oddity to be seen. And the men appear like the birds in the birds. It's just such a weird scene. If you've not seen it, I'm sure it'll be on YouTube or in some essay somewhere, because it is like, talk about masculinity, toxic masculinity, or just the potentiality of male violence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think that's an extreme evocation of, her realizing that this is how she's being looked at kind of more generally. Do you know what I mean? Even by Sandro's character. And it's kind of like, it boils it down to its kind of essence of that kind of violent look. And what's interesting is, again, in one of the interviews with Viti, she sort of talked about working with Antonioni, and one of the things she said was that he taught me how to see myself on screen, which I think is a really interesting thing, because obviously, these films are made in the 1960s when the idea of the male gaze hadn't even been coined yet. So I think that sense of being able to understand what your visual impact is as an actress in the 1960s, and makes a scene like that really interesting, and gives, even with the gaze that's happening, it's clear that Antonioni is doing that not for a kind of gaze effect. He's doing it so that we register what Viti is feeling about it. You know what I mean? Which is classically not the way that you would interpret how the male gaze works. But I mean, it's interesting that you said about what you said about Hitchcock. I was watching there's a great documentary on YouTube called Dear Antonioni. And it was, do you remember Arena, the BBC documentary series?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was part of that series. And one of the people that they were interviewing on that show was Alain Robbe-Grillet, right? The filmmaker and writer. And he's a big
sadomasochistic.
Yeah, right. But he's a great Antonioni advocate, really.
Right.
And he said something really interesting about the comparison between Hitchcock and Antonioni. He said that in Hitchcock, the mystery is set up, and the meaning of it is constantly delayed, right? But in the end, you're given the answer to everything. So you understand where everything fits in a Hitchcock movie by the end, right? In Antonioni, it's exactly the opposite. So everything at the start is straightforward and obvious, but as you progress, the less defined everything is. So the meaning of images is left made constantly problematic as you go through, and it's left to the audience to try and understand, or try and work their way through what the meaning might be, with no answer to that meaning. There's no kind of right answer to what is going on here.
I love that, because that comes back in a way to, there are some symbols that are repeated throughout the film, which by their very repetition, you think, okay, not one of these wouldn't be something that I would consider symbolic, but now I've seen two of them, I'm going to have to think of them. So, for instance, that scene with Claudia has been anticipated by another scene with a young woman who's kind of characterizes herself as a writer, but is in some ways a sort of sex symbol on the level of La Dolce Vita's American actress, whose name now.
Oh, you mean Anita Ekberg?
Exactly. That's it. Swedish actress, actually, maybe. Anyway, she has basically like a massive crowd of men beating down doors and breaking windows to get to her just because she's got a little split in her dress. And they can see a little bit of thigh. And she's obviously deliberately, in some ways, provoking this for the publicity and for the money. But that scene is very similar to the scene, or is thematically similar to the scene of the male gaze, or the sort of potentiality of male violence in the with Claudia in a small town. Likewise, the repeated churches that you see through the film that they never sort of go into, considering that this Anna has sort of been reading the Bible recently. I'm kind of thinking, you're visiting
Yeah.
all these hotels. Maybe she's in the church, man. Have you tried the? And then last example, the volcanic islands that they are visiting, where Anna goes missing. The very last shot, you see Etna in the background, which of course is an active volcano. So it's just these constant sort of rhymings that you're thinking, I'm not entirely sure what this means, but I'm pretty sure it means something.
But that's the thing. Does it mean anything beyond its simple aesthetic effect in the moment?
Yeah, there are lots of volcanoes around Sicily, you know. It's hard to miss
exactly.
Etna.
But also, is it the sense that it's just what Antonioni's doing is throughout all his films, almost trying to strip back the potential for your ability to connect these things in a way that the meaning has an outcome, right? So it's you could kind of say, what is this? This is just a parallel to the mood of the characters. That you've got this opaque landscape or open landscape, and you've got the sea, which is both kind of sublime but also beautiful at the same time, and then you've got the mountains going around, and then you've got these huge churches, and to talk about Orson Welles, the deep focus here is absolutely amazing. Just sort of watching the Criterion version that I've got, it's just so beautifully shot, and there's that symphony as well between. I mean, if there's anybody who's as painterly as a filmmaker can be, I'd like to see who it is. You can just talk about somebody like Wes Anderson, but that's all very, very forced. I think this is just shot and blocked so beautifully. The symphony of the relationship between the characters with each other and the backgrounds and the ways that, as you say, you get the two characters having a conversation, and the deep focus will keep something in the background that you have to be like, oh yeah, that's happening at the same time, And again, I think that search for interpretation, it reminded me of Sontag, that the article against interpretation. It's just see the form for what it is, and that tells you everything you need to know about the psychology of the characters.
And ultimately, if nobody is looking for Anna anymore, does it matter where she went? Does it matter who, And I mean, our search for interpretation is kind of parodied by the journalist who they go and meet, and who says, oh yeah, there's a pharmacist who lives here, and there's someone these spottings of her all over the place. And I'll put some fake news in the newspaper if you pay me to, essentially, so that that's a way Sandro has of trapping Claudia, of getting Claudia to meet him where the pharmacist is.
Yeah. And there's a great reading of the film. Again, I can't remember who said this, but basically the reading was that the whole of the second half of the film, when they get off of the island, is shot from the perspective of Anna. You know what I mean? Like the gaze of Anna.
Right.
Sort of saying, look at what these two people are doing now that you're gone, and it ties into that sort of everything. Everything that everybody is doing is just a facade for the fact that there's emptiness behind it all. He's been called the sort of the auteur of miscommunication, or the artist of miscommunication, and that feeling between the characters and the miscommunication perhaps between what the audience expectations are of a film and what he actually delivers gives you a very, very specific kind of feeling when you're watching, a feeling which a lot of people actually don't like.
Yeah, I mean it's and let's go straight into spoiler territory now because I think we've sort of
Yeah.
danced around it. So you do find out where Anna is. No, I'm joking. I think when we're talking about that alienation, we do have to talk about the end because I think when it becomes more
Yeah.
explicit is where the love story goes. Because you could say, okay, you can fall in love with Sandro, Claudia can fall in love with Sandro, Sandro can fall in love with Claudia, if it's really love.
Well, it isn't,
And of
to
course,
me anyway.
exactly. Of course it isn't because he does the thing of saying, I love you. Tell me I love you, love me again. I don't love you. I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah.
I love you. And it's just like, this is just word games. And he goes off and sleeps with the woman, the sex symbol who showed up at the party now, and who it kind of is suggested is actually just a prostitute when it comes down to it. Aren't you going to give me a souvenir? And he sort of throws money at her contemptuously, but she obviously, well, not necessarily obviously, she accepts it. That's exactly what she meant. She's not insulted by it. That's exactly what she meant. And he is discovered by Claudia in flagrante, so to speak. And so it's like, well, you've betrayed your friend for nothing. And this guy has was never that into, and Anna's kind of gonna be forgotten. There's you know don't ask for who the bell tolls. It doesn't toll for anyone in particular.
No, no. And I think that there is, I mean, Antonioni has definitely expressed that he is concerned, let's say, about and this has got sort of going back to the 60s, concerned about the obsession with eroticism, I think he called it.
Mm.
And and also I remember reading where he was talking about that, how you can't depict love in the same way as 19th century romantic novels. It's just not possible in the I mean, that's why he's a modernist filmmaker. And I think his sort of take on the way that everything is eroticized and the way that love in that sense of the romantic ideal of it doesn't really sit within the parameters of what the modern experience is, if I can use that term. That what really tends to happen is that we search for things that will satisfy us, in the immediate, in an immediate sense, right? And Sandro is obviously the epitome of that. He's not even really a playboy in that sense, is he? You know what I mean? It's not.
No.
I don't think so. I mean, he's just that Anna disappeared and now Claudia's there, and he wants to get with Claudia, and then Claudia's kind of up and down on this situation, and then in one scene she's sort of tired and stays in the hotel room. He goes out, and then another opportunity avails itself, and it's kind of like, well, of
Why
course,
not?
there's not even a motivation behind it. It just is what it is. It happens, and of course, then Claudia sees this and then realizes again, if she didn't know already, or it gets confirmed, that there is no real depth to this relationship, and it almost again reinforces this idea: is there any depth to any relationships in this world?
Yeah, friendship included. And
Yeah,
also, I mean, how do you define yourself if not by other people? I mean, there's also a sense that Claudia is constantly going back to, I'm changing. Something is happening to me. Something is, there's a protracted scene in the mirror where she's sort of pulling faces and everything, which is kind of goes back to Godard and, John Paul Belmondo in Bout de Souffle, looking into the mirror. And I see that sort of an idea of sort of relationships as well being a form of self-realization, and then ultimately, well, I mean that happens in real life. You look at the person you've had a relationship and you think, is that who I am? This kind of person who has a relationship with you, and I might value myself differently. The tease, if tease it be, is obviously when, as you were saying, going back to Hitchcock, is of course we don't find out what happened to Anna. We'll never find out. There's no Easter eggs in the film, which
thankfully.
will, yeah. It's not going to be there's not going to be something which, and there are kind of, she is depressed. She
Mm,
could easily have killed herself.
mm.
there might have been a shark in the water. She might have been lying about not lying,
Yeah.
and um, about lying. Sorry, someone could have shoved her in,
Mm.
or
But
there
by
was.
that time, by this time though, are you concerned about that? I mean, I feel like by the last sort of half an hour, 40 minutes, it really doesn't matter to me that I'm not getting, the possibility of this being resolved. I just don't feel like that's ever coming. You know what I mean? By that
Oh,
time.
oh, absolutely. I totally agree. Generically, it would feel totally unsatisfying if suddenly we went to the Inception style,
Yeah.
the wobbly top and the top fell or the top didn't fall. I don't know. I'm not looking for the film to make a decision, but I think that the urge I have is essentially an urge about I want to know that a person is worth something, and I don't want to forget Anna. The film has I'm not sure the film has forgotten Anna either. I think there's a sense of I like that idea of the perspective of the film maybe being a sort of ghost of Anna in a sense. And I'm also reminded a little bit of Persona in that Claudia has become Anna. So she is stuck in an unsatisfactory relationship with Sandro. I don't believe Sandro was faithful to Anna, at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, no, no, but I guess that my sort of reaction, having seen this, multiple, many times now, is that it's a film that offers more. Interestingly, it offers more the more that you watch it. And I've said many people say the same thing. It's like I hated this film when I first saw it because I was like, my expectations were that this is going to be a sort of mystery that gets resolved in the generic sense for sure. But I think the more that people watch it, the more they find things in it. And maybe that's more to do with in an aesthetic sense and a thematic sense rather than I find more story, because I don't think you can find much more story. Like, say, for example, I think more interesting to me is the rather than where is Anna and what do people feel about that? It's what is Monica Vitti's reaction in that last scene when she touches his hair? You know, what does that actually mean? That becomes more of a pertinent question at the very end of the film, which is totally like a momentary little gesture that comes off the back of her being essentially cheated on. Does it mean that she's consoling him? She understands his alienation because she feels it herself. Is she sort of saying, yeah, I understand that you're a flawed character? I don't know the answer to that, but that gesture becomes in that moment supersedes anything that I'm thinking about with regards to Anna.
But in a sense, that gesture is an incredibly conventional. And I'm not criticizing the film at all, but is it's the stand by your man of Italian matrimony. I mean, they're not married, but if they're in a relationship and your fella goes off and has a relationship, you're kind of supposed to, forgive. It's that Catholic thing, isn't it? Isn't that the sort of,
No,
is
not
it,
to me. No, to me
she
that's
become the
just again.
Madonna a little bit?
Maybe, but again, I just don't. I don't think that if we say that Antonioni is against any given juncture is against falling into convention of filmmaking of relationships. If he's a modernist, then there is no there is no central meaning to anything. You know what I mean?
Sure, right, gotcha.
So in that sense, is that not just another expression of Anna falling into the sort of the sort of bourgeois circle, the bourgeois experience of oh, don't worry, it's fine. And then in the next scene that we don't see, maybe something else happens and she's kind of repulsed again. You know what I mean? It's like there is no closure there. It's
Is
just
it,
another open-ended. It's an open-ended gesture just to signify that the film is not going to explain to you what the outcome is here.
yeah, fast forward 10 years and, introduce me to your painter nephew and I'll,
Yeah.
I'll get my jollies that way. We'll come to a compromise. I mean, there's a little bit of that with when Julia, the woman who has the relationship with the young painter, is going around the island with her ancient old husband. And she says, "Oh, isn't everything beautiful?" And he says something like, "Oh, you said that 20 years ago when we first came here." And you think, how old was she 20 years ago? But she's not that old.
But again, though, that is that a should we react in a narrative sense to something like that. Like, oh, back then she would have been X years old. It's like, that's linearity. It's like there's no such thing as linearity. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like all of those things that don't really count, I think, in Antonioni.
Oh, I think they do. I think there is an essential, we're living in a physical universe, and the father is older than the daughter and the boyfriend is older than. I think those things matter. I think there is a degree in which the power relationships which are set up delineated quite clearly. I think there is a real generational thing. I mean, the young guy who's an architecture student. That's why he's drawing the facade of the church. He's studying it, and so he's the guy who might have the career that Sandro didn't have,
Yes.
and he's spilling the ink as a sort of vandalism against youth.
But I think it sets up. I think without a doubt it goes back to that Hitchcock comparison again. I think it sets up as a physical universe, but through form and through the disjunctures of the linearity of narrative, or the taking away of narrative, then more and more that illusion that films create, a complete universe, is taken away and taken away and taken away, to the point where, like say, for example, in the certain part, I mean, La Ventura not so much, but certainly some of the later films, there is a complete disjuncture between scenes that happen, at one part in time and space. So in Red Desert, for example, there's three of them on the road having a conversation, and then there's a cut, and then there's two of them having the same conversation on the same road, and then that goes on for like 10 minutes, and then there's another cut, and then a car appears from nowhere, and the third person comes back, and you're like, hang on a minute, where were you the last 10 minutes? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like none of that, all bets are off in Antonioni as to, that connects with that, and that connects with that, and that goes for who's older than who's, and all of that kind of stuff.
I agree with you with Red Desert, and I agree with you with later Antonioni, especially when you get to not Vanishing Point, Zabriskie Point. I don't think we're quite there yet. And I mean, this is the beginning of a trilogy of L'Eclisse and The Eclipse and Night. One last question I wanted to ask you, Dario. When we sort of interacted on Twitter about this, I was asking for people to come on, and you very kindly said you'd love to do Antonioni, and you just immediately said we have to do La Ventura. That was sort of like what is that? What gives you that feeling that this is the peak of what he, rather than Blowout or
yeah, Blow Up. Yeah, Blow Up. Similar, but very interesting film. But yeah, I could have, to be honest with you, I could have spoken about The Passenger or Zabriskie Point or Blow Up, to be honest with you. And we did La Notte on the cinematologists, and I have had La Ventura on my top 10 list for Sight and Sound, and I just think it. Again, if you're thinking about the starting point, this is when Antonioni becomes Antonioni, and everything else is a sort of jumping off point for this, or a distillation of what you get in La Ventura. And I think that like I said, I actually wanted to rewatch it again. I hadn't seen it for maybe a year or so, and I just got the Criterion Blu-ray, and I think it just reminded me that there is. I think in this film, there is the starting point of the revolutionization, let's say, of what is acceptable in filmmaking that will be incorporated into so many films to come, in terms of breaking what is what is accepted in a formulaic sense, right? Sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying I think that there is so much going on here that people have taken up afterwards as a blueprint for the basis of what art house modernism in cinema has become. And you could argue between Antonioni and Godard and these kinds of film directors and how their aesthetics and their sort of experimentation has affected filmmakers afterwards. But I think that both of them are absolutely key in doing that. And what's really fascinating is they're both working within the confines of the mainstream still. They got their films made and they went out, distributed to a wide audience. They're not sort of, underground, cult filmmakers in that sense. They're absolutely in the mainstream. So it's just amazing to me that we have that legacy of somebody like Antonioni. I keep trying to show excerpts of this to my students, but it really is a hard sell. But I still think he's absolutely amazing.
Put that scene with when the men appear, because I think it's do that with the birds and
absolutely.
the playground where the birds appear. Listen, Dario, it's absolutely fascinating talking to you. I love talking to you because you really we don't always agree, but we disagree creatively, and that's the most enjoyable form. I wish I had a bit longer to go into it, but you'll have to come back, and we'll have to do another Cinema Italia, because I'd love to hear some of your opinions about not necessarily Antonioni, but well, maybe Antonioni. Maybe we could do a mini series on Antonioni.
Sure, either way, because I am a big Italian cinema fan, so plenty to talk about in that score.
Superb. Thank you so much, Dario. Take care.
Take care, man. Thanks a lot.
Arrivederci ragazzi, ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.